Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Blame It On Marketing. We are going to delve back into the world of PR with the lovely Courtney with us. She's been on one of our episodes before in the Specialty Smackdown. So if you want to see more of her, you can go and have a look at that episode. We'll leave it in the notes. But before we start rattling off, and I've had too much caffeine, so just hold on to your seats, everyone. I will let Courtney introduce herself.
Well, thank you guys for having me again. Really excited to get into this episode. So, just for those who probably don't know me, Courtney Glymph, I'm the founder of YourStoryPR, a boutique PR agency based out of the UK with clients globally. And yeah, really excited to talk about PR and marcoms and all things related to brand awareness for founders.
Awesome. So one of the reasons we wanted to get you back, Courtney, is because obviously PR and marketing, we work together, we work hand in hand, but I kind of feel like we are banding together in this episode against founders and people who've kind of got misconceptions about PR. So I want to start off by asking you, why do you think some founders in particular are obsessed, or founders and organizations actually are obsessed with PR and they want to kind of make that their focus?
Well, where I'll start is there's a famous Bill Gates quote where he says, and I don't think this is sort of a myth, but I'm going to go with it anyway, where he said that if he was down to his last dollar, he'd spend it on PR. And I think that kind of tells you everything you need to know. It's an exercise that doesn't serve one function, but serves several, whether it's brand awareness, whether it's credibility, whether it's lead generation tactics, whether it's supporting generally top of funnel marketing and sales activity. I think PR has a diverse, array of what it can do to support a business. And so I think, if you're starting an organization, you're starting out disrupting an industry, you want sort of to make noise about it. And PR is probably the best way to do that, depending on, budgets, et cetera. So I think that's why there's a general interest from organizations, from founders, et cetera, to really invest in PR and to do it wisely, I should say.
Speaking about founders and about, I guess, a lot of the times new organizations that want to get out there and make a splash, I find that it can sometimes be a little bit difficult to have a conversation around how interesting it is, the thing that you are doing, or I guess trying to make it interesting, because I think founders have, obviously it's their baby and it's their passion and it's what they're doing, so they're super excited, but sometimes it isn't very newsworthy. Do you have that experience as well, or is it just me?
Certainly not just you. I think most PR folks who aren't doing something, really, if you're not doing something consumer related, and this is just my experience of the last sort of 17 years, if you're doing something that's really B2B down in the corporate weeds, it's not going to get the general population excited. So I think there's a question about stepping back and thinking, like, how eventually does this become important or relevant to the everyday layman? And you could be doing something like DevOps, automation, workflows. I'm just going to use all the jargon, right? You could be doing something like that, but eventually that touches real people, because the customers that you're working with are perhaps consumer-led organizations, right? They need your DevOps engineering support, or your automation support, or your AI support to deliver apps, right? And at the end of the day, you and I use apps. So, it's uncovering how you tell the story to make it worthwhile and relevant to the general population. And so again, you could be doing something in life sciences, and most people aren't biologists, but most people understand that we had a pandemic, right? And so the importance of biology and engineering biology becomes really relevant. So again, I think it's a matter of telling, not even just founders, but CEOs or whoever's owning the story or the brand, to say, like, how do we get down to the real nitty gritty here and make it relevant to a larger population? That's particularly important when you want to get into tier one. So for example, if you're looking at trade publications in your industry, well, you expect that the journalists who are writing in those publications know about this space. And so they can write a story in this space that's relevant to people, again, who are knowledgeable. Whereas if you're going to USA Today, well, you better tell a story that 200 million people in the US will understand. So, it's really understanding that storytelling aspect.
Can I just dig into one little bit there? So I guess it's around targeting. So just so I understand, because I'm not super PR educated by any means, do you think it is worth trying to target those like tier one companies if what you do is very niche, and the likelihood of kind of return on investment is going to be quite small, because you're not targeting, you're targeting everyone, and someone who works in DevOps will probably read it, but surely there's a better way to get to them more directly through wherever they're hanging out, rather than on the BBC, the US Today, like whatever big
Yeah.
publication it might be.
Yeah, I mean, every founder wants to be in TechCrunch. If you ask any founder you work with, everyone wants to be in TechCrunch, which is like great, cool, because TechCrunch is an iconic publication and it's been around for as long as it has, and actually does deliver ROI. Like the amount of times I've been told, being in TechCrunch has led to X, or being in TechCrunch has led to Y is impressive, right? So I always feel really pleased when a client says that. But you're right, there's an inverse relationship between the audience size and the actual effectiveness of that PR. So, the BBC will have, I assume, hundreds of millions of viewers worldwide, right? Certainly, actually. But that's just 100 million people like you and I, who aren't going to be decision makers at the end of the day around who's buying software, software for the dev team or versus the ops team versus the cybersecurity team, right? So yes, it's great from let's say, awareness perspective, and also a little bit of this is ego, right? I'd like to be in the BBC, but are my buyers there? Probably not. Probably not. Your buyers are probably going to be in like Engineering Weekly or Engineering Daily, or again,
Hacker News.
yeah,
I don't
right,
know.
exactly.
Yeah.
Because actually, to be fair, we do get a lot of people saying like, I really want to be in Hacker Noon, or Product Hunt, right? Where there is a really targeted return on investment. But then you also do get people who are like, I really want to be in Forbes and the New York Times,
Yeah. Yeah.
which is great.
I,
But
I guess it could be good for
that's
like funding, or if you're IPOing or when you're exiting. Like I can see those bigger publications being great, because then maybe, investors and those kind of people will catch you. But again, that's a very small niche of people to go after
and
with
also
a publication like that.
it's a matter of education as well. It's everyone wants to be in these publications, but it's not super easy to get into them.
One of the things I find interesting, Courtney, because I started out, obviously now we're all in B2B, but I started out working in the charity sector, and there is this really huge, I don't know, like everyone wants you, emphasis, that's the word, thank you. There's a huge emphasis on PR in the charity sector. And again, I think some of that is potentially ego driven. I think some of that's, I think some of that is genuinely cause driven as well. They're like, well, we're the experts in this thing, so we should be asked about it if it goes to national news. But the what I've seen is the negative impact of that. I think there's two bits to that for me. There's the fact that like they want everybody who it works in marketing to have a PR background, which is insane, because there's just a lack of understanding about the specialist skill set you need to work in PR versus some of the other marketing specialisms. And the other thing is when things like, and this is a really bad example, it's not a bad example, I might get in trouble for talking about it, but I'm going to do it anyway, is when Grenfell happened, the Red Cross, I was living in London at the time, and they spent, I wouldn't even like to know how much money publicising what they were doing for Grenfell all around London. And then it transpires that they actually genuinely didn't really help anybody at Grenfell. They were actually kind of like interfering and a pain in the arse, and not actually really helping people who'd been involved in the incident. So I see this, but yet they were the ones that the press were coming to, and it was creating this huge negative. Well, actually, I mean, unless you actually really understand that sector, maybe you wouldn't know that it was negative. But I sort of see this sort of, I guess what I'm trying to get at there is there ever a time when actually it's kind of wrong because it is ego driven by the founder or by the organization's, C-suite to have that kind of level of media attention?
Well, I think if it gets, I mean, I think that's a very specific instance also, and I can't speak to more of the B2C point, but I think there's two things about what you were saying. One, I think an organization like the Red Cross will just be able to get tier one coverage because it's the Red Cross, right? So it's like saying Apple could get tier one coverage because people all, you're functioning more as a press office there rather than, going out for proactive PR. So they have kind of a double-edged sword in that instance. People are always going to be wanting to talk to them, and it's kind of how do you manage that effectively. And then I think the other thing about it, is it wrong? I don't think it's wrong. I think it's just short-sighted. Again, it comes back to the like is this an ego-driven exercise versus is this actually valuable for the business? Because it's more about resource and wasting your time and spinning your wheels, because that's ultimately what you're going to do. If you are a company, founder, startup, what have you, sort of a Fortune 500, you have to know, where to play, where to spend your money, where to spend your time. So, do you really want to be talking about everything and anything just to get into get into a publication? No, it's about relationship building at the end of the day. I mean, the better relationships you have with a publication, the more insight you can gather from that editor, that journalist, to say, like, what are you working on? Like, how can we help? Rather than just like busting your ass to get on Sky News, like when it's not necessarily the best thing for you.
I'm gonna seal a point that Emma also has from her experience, which is that I guess that's one of the other negative things about the charity sector being super into PR, is that they expect everyone to be able to do PR, like all the marketing people that they hire. What's the reality of that? Because of it doesn't exist at all in other sectors, as far as I have seen, at least in B2B at all. Like, you would never be expected to do digital marketing and PR. Well, like, how does that look?
I would agree with that. I mean, again, with my experience, primarily or predominantly in B2B, you just don't see that. You have very clear lines of delineation of like who's doing what. The only time I will say you see that is when it's a company that's like really, lean and agile from a budget perspective, and they're like, you've got to wear multiple hats, right? So learn how to do PR, right? So as opposed to, we expect you to know how to do this. You'll often see sort of like a salesperson leading efforts from the PR perspective, again, because they're aligning sales and PR for ill or for good. And so, I've come across that quite a bit with small companies who are like, yeah, I'm the head of sales, head of marketing, and the head of PR. Like so that's more necessity, and it was born out of necessity rather than anything else. But I will say, you don't really ever get it the other way around. You don't get like, companies going, I need a marketing person, so can the PR person step in and do ABM? Like, it would just never happen unless you really wanted to learn that skill. Or can you run, our account-based marketing and top of funnel? They would just be like, no, you haven't had a skill. You don't have the skill set for that necessarily. It's not like it's impossible to run, but I don't think their natural inclination would be to turn to the comms person to do that.
And have you ever seen, so I think, and this might just have been Ruta and I's experience, is that have you ever seen when marketing and PR end up at odds with each other? Because I can imagine that sometimes, like, especially in B2B, we're very much like, revenue focused, data driven marketers who are like, is this impacting the bottom line? PR sometimes, you're, in terms of the way that your impact is measured, is different, which is understandable because of the purpose of PR versus the purpose of running digital ads. So do you ever find that there's that tension is created, and has that ever been difficult?
So I think I might push back a little bit on what you said, and also, I guess, answer from there. So I think it depends on what you're leveraging PR for. I think you can measure PR in sort of hard, data, and can be, use analytics to do that, because it's important to understand how PR is supporting top of funnel activity. So, for example, if you're running a campaign around research and data, you can very much say, this press release led to people, visiting the website, or this research piece, it was a gated asset, and you can do a data driven analysis there. So I think there isn't actually an interesting quote, though. So I think I'm on the fence. Part of me is like, PR isn't a science, because you either feel like PR is working or you don't. In a lot of instances, people are very like gut driven around PR. On the flip side, you can absolutely provide data and go, interesting that your website conversions have increased over the last 6 months now that you've been doing PR. Is it solely because of PR? Probably not. But all of your functions are working together nicely now, so that you're seeing an increase in website conversions, and people are somehow looking for your name more than they were 6 months ago, right? So you can start to piece that together. But I think the other thing is that I've personally, I guess very luckily, have never found that there's this real contention between marketing and PR in my roles, right? I've never come across a situation when I was in-house, or agency side or consulting, where I felt like the marketing department really was like, you we own this, or you're not a part of that, or, I've never experienced it, though I've seen a lot of chatter about that, and I've read quite a bit about it in my, the course that I'm doing. So I know it exists, but I've just been able to sort of curve and swerve around it in my career.
I think that's because you're good at what you do, Courtney.
We'll go with that.
I think,
We'll say
I
that.
think,
Yeah. Or
yeah,
I
I think,
haven't been working with assholes or guests.
yeah, I think where we've seen it be difficult is where, for example, you're working with a PR agency, because I think in the startup that's the norm. You kind of outsourced your PR until you get to a point where you think you might bring someone in house, and then what happens is the PR people are like, oh yeah, we'll just keep applying for awards. We'll just keep going for awards with no real kind of justification or like, that those sorts of things. And those things in particular, awards, are actually like a real big burden on the team, aren't they? Because of the resource, they're kind of resource intensive to like apply for it, to go to pitch, all that sort of stuff, and then to pay to be there. Because we all know that if you're not in the room, you're not going to win. So yeah, that's where I've seen it. That's probably the only, apart from when I worked in the third sector, I'd say that's the only real time that I've noticed in B2B where there's been a bit of a tension where, and it probably is down to working with the wrong people. And actually, that's probably a good question to ask you, Courtney. Like, when you are looking for an agency, or you're looking to work with a PR freelancer, what are some of the things that you should ask as a marketing team so you are working with someone who's like gets it?
Well, I guess even in both instances, what I would say is you want to make sure you're aligned on like your plans, right? So I think everyone being really open about like, what are our objectives for this quarter? What are our objectives for next quarter? What are our objectives for this year? So for me, it's a sort of open dialogue around like, how do we work together effectively so that we're all singing from the same hymn sheet, we're all doing the same activity, we're all working towards the same goal. So I think you should definitely, one, experience is also necessary. So obviously, as I say, PR is obviously a relationship driven, it's in the name, relationship driven industry and career. So what are their relationships like? I also will say it doesn't take a rocket scientist to build relationships, but you have to have a very good outlook and ability to do so, right? That's not everyone's bag. So I think you have to really want to be able to build relationships, pick up the phone, call people, all that sort of like bread and butter activity in doing PR. So the best PR people I know, the best consultants, the best freelancers, the best in-house, there are people who are really keen on building relationships and have done at the beginning of the career, now have moved on to strategy or business development or what have you. So I would ask that question about like, how keen are they on building relationships? Because you find that some folks don't like media relations, which I personally find surprising, because I'm like, how did you build your career in this industry if you didn't want to have relationships, right? I also like that part of the job. So, to each his own. So I would ask that question. I also think the other thing is just ensuring that they really understand your industry, because there have been times where, you'll talk to someone and say, do you really understand robotics, right? And it's a really specific thing, like, to understand. And you can't like flag that. You have to be able to say yes. You have to be able to talk about it. Though some PR people, including myself, can flag some stuff. So yeah, I think it's a matter of just really making sure that you're aligned on planning. You're aligned on if they have that interest and that excitement around, raising awareness, and also storytelling and writing. I would say those are the two biggest things to ensure that people enjoy writing and they enjoy storytelling. Because if they don't,
How would you figure that out? Obviously, you can ask them, but again, anyone can say anything. Is it samples? Is it
samples. I think it's
references?
easy. Yeah, references, samples. I'm certainly not a proponent of making people. I think this is super old school. You'll probably get people who disagree with this, but like, making people write strategies or I'm like, if you don't assume if this person can't write a press release, then like you're already on the wrong foot. Like, come on, you're starting off in the wrong place. And I also think there's something kind of, and I remember this from when I was young, people asking you to like do kind of work that is going to be used on their client project somewhere. I always feel a little bit weird about that. I mean, I think you can assess it through traditional channels of like proposals and like, yeah, ideation, sure, for sure. references, and you'll see like any PR person, agency or otherwise, freelancer can share testimonials or can share examples of their work. So I don't think that has to be particularly difficult. And would be straightforward for everyone because it's easy to understand. I think if you're also someone interviewing an agency and you don't really know PR, you wouldn't know what to ask. And I think those are really straightforward, easy things to understand.
Someone who's realistic and is honest with you at the point that you say, if you walk into a meeting with a founder and they're like, we want to be in TechCrunch, and you're like, you've just started, good luck with that. I think someone being able to push back and say, realistically, that's not going to happen. It's going to start out with like whatever low level media outlets or like more niche media outlets, whatever it might be, then that's to me, that's a green flag. It'd be the same as a marketer walking in and being like, like Ruta and I hate this when someone walks in and they're like, we need to change the website and the CRM and
we need to rebrand. It's like,
we need to rebrand. We're like, no, we don't. No. So it'd be the same with your PR person, right? It's like, be realistic. Yeah.
Exactly right. I think people just like not bullshitting you is the most important thing, because you will get loads of people being like, I want to be in X publication, and you have to go, but one, because also you have to say why. Like, give me a reason why you want to do that, and what do you think that's going to do for your business? Like, not for you, not for your brand. Like, what will that do for your business? And I think that's such an important point, is like pushing back on people to be like, I promise you I know what I'm doing. I'm not going to give you the wrong advice just to give you the wrong advice. This will benefit both of us at the end of the day, because there have been loads of instances where I've heard people say, I'm going to promise you the world, and they haven't. And it's not to say that they didn't try. It's just, it's unrealistic. Like, with the amount of time people have nowadays to answer emails, the amount of like requests that they're getting, any journalist, I don't care if it's, again, the Daily Star or the Daily whatever, they're getting inundated. So to try and promise something like that to someone off the, off straight off the bat is impossible. That's an investment. That the point is, I think people don't understand, is that PR is an investment. It's like sales. You invest in a salesperson and you give them 6 months to get up to speed on what you're doing, who you're selling it to, what's the product, this, that, and the other. Why people don't see PR in the same way, I just don't understand.
Although I have worked with Courtney on very one-off things where, we've had a report on something, etc., and she does a fucking fabulous job getting that out to people, and we get views and we get published. So I'm also going to say, don't discredit yourself, because you can fucking do some really instant great shit as well.
Thank you. I think it depends on what the activity is as well, right? This is part of the storytelling. If you're hitting on something that's part of the trend or the zeitgeist or this or that, the other thing, then you're luckier than if someone gives you like a really dry piece of work and you're like, I've got to make this work. And that's still, possible. It's just, sometimes it's easier than others.
Going back to talking about a little bit about, I guess, ego, or it's not even ego, it's just people being excited and, I guess wanting the world and seeing themselves in TechCrunch or whatever it might be. And then combining that with maybe the marketing person that's sitting there and they're like, I don't know if that's going to happen, or like this PR agency is promising the world, but like these things are very hard. Could you give a couple of points of advice maybe to the marketing person to be able to have that conversation maybe with the founder that's super excited, or with the PR agency that's also obviously super excited and are promising the world, to just kind of come back down to a bit more of a normal level playing field, if that makes sense?
Yeah, I think even when I've worked with marketers who don't necessarily understand PR, they've always been like open to learning. And I think that's the most important thing, is that everyone needs to be open to learning about, everyone's interests and their objectives. So for example, if a marketing person is dealing with a founder is going, I really want, or I need to be in X, Y, and Z. I think there are like questions that you need to ask. Again, why do you feel that's right for the business? How do you think it aligns to our overall marketing objectives and our sales objectives, or our investor objectives? I think there's a lot of explanation that needs to be done to ensure that everyone's on the same page. So it's, I think, more question asking and making sure you're asking the right questions rather than anything else. So, why is this necessary? How will this benefit the business? How will it ultimately benefit our marketing and sales funnel? And will this have long-term impact? And then going back to it, more importantly, is like, what's the story we're trying to tell to get into these publications? Because that's where the education piece starts to come in, because someone who works with these publications daily can say to you, that's not a story that's going to make the cut, right? You need to like take a step back, not be selling your product, and actually say something, excuse me, interesting or provocative or useful or educational, right? So I think it's a matter of aligning on all of those points.
I guess, yeah, if I was in that place trying to dig into, if like the PR teams or agencies talking about like, oh yeah, we'll get you into TechCrunch, being like, okay, like what does that actually look like? Like, what will we need to do to be in TechCrunch? Like, is it a one press release and done situation, or is it, some sort of study or thousands of customer quotes, or like, customer stories? Like, what does that actually look like? Because, we can say stuff, but I guess quantifying it in terms of work and resource needed is probably the next stage of understanding whether that's something that's reasonable for you as well.
Yeah, I think also as you were talking, you kind of hit the nail on the head. Is like, it's an investment. This like stuff won't happen overnight. This is an investment, and the other thing is just do your research. So if you've come to me and you're a company that's in, let's see, I don't, I'm going to say fashion, right? Well, who's writing about fashion in TechCrunch? Like, why do you assume you should just be in TechCrunch? Like, give me the last 5 articles you've seen about a company that's doing something similar to yours in this publication. And if you can't, perhaps that's telling, right? Or, often like the sort of companies that struggle, I think, to get into big publications are like marketing tech, because people just assume, because it's the marketing title, it makes it harder for those types of companies to get published because it feels like it's sales led, right? And so I often think, like, if a company says to me, I want to be in X, like I want to be in the BBC. Like, when was the last time you saw a company like yours being covered on the BBC? Just tell me, so I know that you've done your research rather than you just pulled it out of the air and said, I want to do it. And I think that's really important. I think, again, that's an education piece and a hand-holding piece that often needs to be done.
Absolutely. And so, Courtney, if you've got organisations that are thinking they maybe should dabble in PR, are there like any key indicators to you that say actually these guys are ready for it, they should invest some money and time into it, if they're thinking actually, well, we just don't do PR because we don't do that?
I think one thing is time and investment. So like, if a founder is kind of like, I want to do PR, or a CEO or anyone in the C-suite, it's like, I want to do PR, but I don't want to spend time doing it. That's like a huge red flag, because people often think it's like, I had someone say to me once that it was low effort, high impact. And I was like, we're done here.
Okay.
We're done.
Since when anything low effort is high impact in marketing, please?
I mean, just marketing, no.
Please,
Nothing.
like, I want to know what those things are.
Also, incredibly offensive. Like,
Yes,
it's an offensive thing to say
absolutely.
to someone.
Absolutely.
So I think if you think you're going to be handing it over to someone to just do, like, magically it's going to happen without any sort of like investment of your time, massive red flag. Because the first couple of months will be like, this is homework. Like, I don't know your business the way you do. I don't know your customers the way you do. Like, you have to spend some time helping your team and your people embed themselves into your story. So like, just be aware of that. I think the other thing is if you have the structure around you to make it successful. So, you don't want to be like a one-man band. I mean, there are people who do it, but then they're really dedicated to it. Like, they really are invested in marketing PR, and they see the value in it. So if you're that person who like kind of needs to be nudged to see the value in it, and you're like a 1 or 2 person outfit, like, maybe you should wait until like someone can fly the flag for you. And I think it's also, again, as I say, an investment thing. If you're willing to make that monetary investment, like, no one's ever going to get anything for free. Let's just be real, right? So if you don't want to make that monetary investment, then, wait till you have the resources to do so, because of course, you'll always be able to find someone to do it for next to nothing. But then again, are your results, is your ROI going to be next to nothing? And I think that's where a lot of people get burned on PR, and they like, they have this like grudge against the industry forever. It's like, oh, I spent like 400 quid on someone to do something and they didn't get me into TechCrunch. So like, forget the whole thing. And you're just like, you wouldn't say that to a salesperson. You wouldn't say that to an engineer. You literally would not say that to an engineer and go, I'm giving you 200 quid, build this app. And if they don't do it, you're like, forget devs forever. So I don't understand why it's like reasonable to say it's for any part of the marketing function. People will do that with social as well. Here's 200 pounds, make it work, make us go viral.
Yeah.
I mean, I
oh
can't.
my god, it's we all know why that is. It's because there is just this thing where you think because you can touch it and feel it, and you see marketing all the time, and you interact with the apps, the social media apps, that you therefore your children are as capable as people like us sitting here, and we know that that's absolutely not true. I think it just goes back to like the fact that people just don't respect that it's a science and an art. There are not many people on this planet who can do both. You have with 3 of them right now.
So lucky. But yeah, that kills me when people, I mean, and I don't even like really, I wouldn't profess to be a sort of professional, and it's certainly as you guys are, and they're like, oh, you want to go viral? No, get out of here.
What are some of the activities when you are approached by a company that the marketing team that are already doing that you're like, yeah, we're gonna work, we're gonna PR the crap out of this? I'm sure you don't ever say that in your head. That's just something I say. But what are some of the activities that get you excited and you're like, yep, they're on the right path, they're ready to go now?
I think it's when the people are doing something genuinely interesting or genuinely like disruptive or innovative, where you're just like, oh shit, like I didn't even think of that as like a thing, and like now you're really on a hot streak. Also, when people are doing something that people are talking about, so it makes it less of a like hurdle to get in front of media. Um, and also when you have a marketing person who just really understands where PR slots into their overall budget or their overall objectives. So that's to me is when I'm like, oh, this is really going to like work well, because all of the sort of the stars are aligning where this person understands what we do, this person is like supportive of what we do, is helpful, and also what the company overall is doing is hitting on some trends in their industry.
That's good advice. That's that one bit that's so tricky though, because it's always founders that think what they're doing is more interesting than it might actually be.
Yeah. Or it's interesting to like a really small portion of the world, and that's fine, because your TAM doesn't need, your market doesn't need to be 4 trillion for you to be successful, right? So like I think that's something people need to recognize. Like, what's your total addressable market? What's your ICP? And then let's look at that, because that's who you really need to target. You don't need to target everyone if that's who we're going after.
Yeah, I always think of developers as the best example for that. They're hard to get hold of. They're generally very untrustworthy of external sources of information when they haven't played with it or had someone that they know recommend it. But I think that that's completely fine. If you understand those things, you can still absolutely do PR for that audience. It's just going to have to look a certain way, and you're going to have to present it in a certain way. So yeah, and your audience might be tiny, but especially in the B2B world, like spending's insane on tech, so that's completely fine.
Yeah. I mean, you could spend like, again, this is like more of a niche thing, but like Reddit could be a very good source of revenue generating activity for you if you do it well, right? But you have to be open to that. It's not a traditional avenue, but yeah, we've seen that as well.
Yeah,
yeah, sorry. Go
no, my partner has introduced me to the world of GitHub, and like it's an actual thing in itself, and like people chat on there, and there's repos for everything you want, and people like are like GitHub famous, and I was like, no idea this world existed.
Yeah. But again, if you use it correctly, like that could lead to significant sales, right? So you just have to know where you should be going, where you should be looking for community and support.
Yeah, that's it. You just got to go to where your audience actually are and actually are communicating with each other. The other thing I think that people do take for granted when it comes to PR and some of these other activities, because a lot of this also feeds into things like your advocacy and your community, because you want to have those stories that help bring all of this to life, is that they don't understand that this is sometimes a longer play. Like, it's not necessarily a quick win. I mean, like we were saying, Courtney, you've done an amazing job where we've worked with you, where you've turned something around quick and got us loads of attention. But that's because I think that's also, it's partially because the content piece was worth it and you're good at your job. So the combination of the two is like a winning thing. But in other places, that's going to take time to build. It's not going to be like an overnight thing necessarily. If you're going into Reddit and you want to own that space, that's going to take some investment and some time and energy. So yeah, I think people do underestimate that. They're like, we'll just do Reddit. It's like, no, you won't.
Yeah. But also I think to that point is that a lot of that is still one and done, right? Like those are campaigns and those are snapshots, as opposed to like a long-term investment. Like, you go back to Nike. Nike didn't do like a one and done sort of thing on one shoe, right? They invested in their brand. So it depends on what this is also a good point. It depends on what you're investing in PR for, right? So you can always do a quick snapshot win, but you can always invest longer term to actually build a brand and build credibility. And I think that's the most important point.
Awesome. Well, Courtney, we're going to end there. But before we do, we always ask everyone one question. Is there anything we should have asked you that we didn't?
I'm trying to think. The thing is, I would say no, only because I feel like I've gotten in the points around investment. Really, like that's what I find really where people don't think about it is like there's no investment, that you should just turn around and be able to do PR because you do PR, and that kind of kills me. So I wouldn't say there was a question you didn't ask, but I think I've covered. I think we've covered the most important points. Just because again, there's like a naivete around what we do. There's like, and also to be fair, there's a little bit of opaqueness on our end as well. I think people find that marketing in general can be a little bit opaque. And I think there's an education piece, but people have to be curious, right? You can't just say it's opaque and not be curious, not ask questions. So I think that's important.
Some people ask questions not because they want to know the answer, but it's almost because they want to respond with whatever they are thinking. And yeah, that happens, I think, in our professions quite a lot.
Yeah. But I guess that's a lack of curiosity, right? It's like, I just want to tell you something.
Yeah. The people who start something with, I don't know much about this, but let me give you my opinion anyway. It's like, yep, red flag. Thank you so much. Moving on. Well, thank you so much for joining us, Courtney. I feel educated, and which is always really, really good for us to sit here and be like, wow, yeah, we've definitely learned more about PR than I knew before. And there's definitely a lot of good tips in there for anybody who's thinking about pressing the red button on PR. And obviously you can contact Courtney if you are thinking about it. So thanks, everybody. We will see you again soon. And we mentioned the community, so please do join blameitonmarketing.com. And if you want to come and chat to Courtney or us and come and have a whinge or ask questions about PR, you've got a lovely, safe place to do it. So we'll see you there. Thanks, everyone.